Hey, this is Will from MachineLoveUs.com here with another in the videos of building a new project I'm calling Casper. We are going to build an app that is now going to use Flask RESTPlus. So I'm using Flask RESTPlus, Swagger implementation. Eventually, I hope to use Vue for the front end, Vue.js, and eventually get around to MongoDB, implementing some machine learning models and bringing those to production. That is all in the future. Right now, what I'm going to go over is the creation of the API. If you remember from the last video, I had Swagger and the beginnings of a Flask API. I'm going to go through it again, this time with Flask RESTPlus, and show you what I've built thus far. And so what I have here, by the way, all of this is built from this wonderful article from 2016, essentially building beautiful REST APIs using Flask Swagger UI and Flask RESTPlus. So this is just a fantastically written tutorial that I borrowed a lot from, and that I will be continuing to follow to build this out. But eventually, what I have come up with by the end of this here is this is the Swagger interface for the API, if you recall. And so I'm calling this project Casper. Eventually it'll be, your friendly neighborhood ghostwriter. So this will be an app that will help ghostwrite, essentially. So tweets and other things. But what I have here is the interface via Swagger to the API. What's nice, by the way, at the bottom here is we have our models laid out, right? So I am making a product, and the product has a user, which is an integer for the user ID. The user input for each product, essentially the user will supply some text, and they'll get output, they'll get it back. And then there'll be a publication date, which will be the date that they submitted the form that they got their data back. So that's the model, and which is nice that it's all documented right here. Then we have the API itself. Thus far, what I have is two get endpoints, one to get all of the products, and I have these in a database, just a couple of them, and I could try it out. I can execute via this Swagger interface. Failed to fetch currently. Okay, so I need to start this back up. Okay, so here I am. So as always, I am in my Casper repo. I have my environment activated. Okay, down here I have Mongo. I use PyMongo, MongoDB as my backend. You can use SQL Alchemy is a favorite, or Postgres. Okay, so I start this with Mongod, and that will start the database listening, and then I can start Python 3 main.py, and this will start the server running on localhost 888. I got some logging going on here, so let me go back. There's nothing at 888. We'll have to make an index for that. But here is my API, and I can get all of the posts that are currently in the database. Okay, which is this response body here. I can create a new blog post by putting some text in, and I'll show you this. You do user 100. Let's just do user input is user supplied input, and then output will be production or product generated via machine learning model, and then that is my that is the data for the product. I can execute it. I get a 201 back, which is expected. And then let me just show you here in my database. So I use RoboMongo. I think I talked about that in the last video. I have a Casper database. I have a products collection. And then this is just filled with some fake data. But you could see that I must have pressed the button twice because I have two records. But I have user 100, user supplied input, and product generated via machine learning model in the database. So that is a working post, okay? And then I can get the product ID back. So this endpoint is product/ID. So I'm going to try that out. I need an ID here. I supply the actual object ID from my Mongo database. This will be the endpoint. And when I execute that, I get in the response body here. Okay, so why don't we look at some code to see how all of this fits together, and then we can walk through it. Okay, so here I am. I have Casper, which is my project directory up top. I have Casper down here, which is actually where all my requirements have been living from my virtual environment. So that's all that is. When I do source Casper bin activate fish, because I'm using fish shell, it goes into there and activates my environment. So that's all that is. Front end I will get to later in a different video. It's the beginning of a Vue.js project. Templates we can ignore for now. And then what we're going to be focusing on is the not necessarily the database, a little bit about the database, but the API and main. So let's walk through main here. And so let's go through it. So I'm going to import logging. I just configure the logging module. That's a standard Python module that you can configure for different features. But we're going to bring in Flask Blueprint, and then we are going to be doing making our own API, making an API folder and building that out. And from the API RESTPlus, I import the API here. Okay, so this is Flask RESTPlus, and it's an extension. It has this API extension, and I can just set the first version 1.0 of my Casper API and give it some information, and this will be the heart, sort of the heart of the API. Let's go back to main. And so I just import that. I'm just separating out these folders to be a bit cleaner. Let's work backwards. So when I start up, when I hit Python 3 here, Python 3 main.py, it's catching this piece on the bottom here. It's running main, which initializes the app. The initialize app takes a Flask app and configures it with some default configurations that I have set up in the config file, which I've put here. Okay, so we have some Flask app config variables just about where to go for a 404 help, where to actually set the server name. This is going to be localhost 8088, right? Flask debug true. These configs come in handy when you're going to go to production and need a different kind of configuration. You can swap out a production configuration and then get ready with production things when you need them. Okay, then we're going to set a blueprint. So a blueprint in Flask allows you to create a more modular application. We can have the /API. We don't have anything when we just go to our default page. Here, we need to go to API to actually see this Casper API in documentation. That's fine, because what we'll have is the main page will consume this API and be another sort of Flask app, or it could be something completely different and just consume the API. We initialize the blueprint with the Flask RESTPlus API that we set in our API RESTPlus.py file, we add this namespace, which we'll get to in a second, and then register the blueprint in the Flask app, and then start everything up. Okay, so the register actually registers the names, the namespace, and the blueprint. So let's go to this namespace, which is where a lot of the Flask RESTPlus action happens. Okay, so what we have here is the API folder, which has the endpoints defined for it. And this is where a lot of the action actually occurs. So let's go through this file a little bit slower than we went through the other one. And what I'll start with here are these namespace routes. Okay, so from the Flask RESTPlus API that we had defined, we are going to make this namespace. Okay, so operations related to customer products. Okay, so, you know, utilities related to products, let's say. Okay, and this becomes the definition of the the products API documentation that you see here. Okay, so this is the namespace, and in that namespace we have the product collection, which will register, which is this get and post. So these are the two get and post methods, RESTful methods that we saw on that Casper Swagger page. So get, post, update, delete are the REST sort of methods that will register automatically with Swagger. So you want to use get, post. If we need something different, we need a new route. This is where we add the namespace route, and we can add a API response there, product net found 404, if we put in a product that we don't have in our database. Okay, so let's just do that quickly. Okay, so what we do is we get a 500. I would have expected that, oh, we get the 404 code response product not found. Okay, so that's what we get there, which is very nice. Okay, so this route exists. We have registered the namespace as products, and then just this /. So if we had products here, this would be API/products, which we don't want. We just want products / which is this route. And then we have the get, which I use as returning a list on products.find. So what is db.products.find? Well, what we can do actually is go to another terminal here. What I'll do is go into Casper, activate it. I can go into IPython, and then from database, because that's where it is, what I'm doing, I import the DB, which is my MongoDB. And I can do db.products.find. And what that returns is a PyMongo cursor in this case. But what I'm actually returning are all of the products in this database. But products here is still a PyMongo cursor. So I convert that to a list, and this is the list of dictionaries of all of the products in that database. Okay, so no need, like last video, to mess around with creating fake data. We're actually pulling the products out of the DB. Then the result is a dump of the product schema. Okay, so now this is where we delve back into our database folder, which I said we talk about a little bit. And here I'm actually defining the schema of the products themselves. So this is the product schema. Now note, this is a little bit different than the schema that we see on the Casper page, because Marshmallow, which is another sort of library that I'm using here, is not integrated with Flask RESTPlus yet, although there are there are discussions going on about it. Okay, so I can take this schema here and dump out, JSONify the schema to return a dictionary of products in the result.data. So why don't we do this interactively and see what we get, which we can do via IPython. So I said this is the products schema because what we have here is many equals true. So let's actually go through and see what's happening here. So remember I have products, which is a PyMongo cursor. Let's change that to be the list. It's actually what we're returning in that get function. Okay, so that's the list of products from my database. Then what I said we do is from the database models, we import the product schema, and then I instantiate it. I instantiate it with product schema many equals true. Okay, and Marshmallow is giving me a warning that saying in 3.0 schemas will always be strict. So we're going to have to dive into that warning a little bit later. Or just something to be mindful of. So here's the result. Okay, so this is what I'm doing. I've marshaled the result, and in this Marshmallow object, Marshmallow schema marshal result, I have data, which is the schema that I described. Notice that the products that I returned have these underscore IDs, which are Mongo engine underscore IDs, but the data that I'm getting back are actually the schema data. So this is a little bit different. The schema is actually, I'm able to push that schema out, just exactly what I want, and not return the underscore ID from MongoDB. Okay, and then I JSONify the products and return them there. Let's go through this post request a little bit. So this post request expects a product. The product is from the API serializers. Okay, so this is why, this is where the coordination of Marshmallow and Flask RESTPlus would be useful, because for the API, we define the model again, the user input, output, and publication date. Remember, I didn't have the publication date in the actual Marshmallow model, so I think I need to keep those up to date, which I'll have to do in the future. So this is the Flask RESTPlus product model that I'm going to post. Okay, so what I do in this post, it expects the product, which is defined via this serializer, which I essentially have to define twice. And then I have this create product function, which takes in a data and then pulls out of the data the user input, and output, and then creates the product as a dictionary of those things, and then inserts that product into the database. Okay, so let's see that again. So remember, this product model has a publication date on it, but when we post here, try it out, user 0, user input string, publication date right now, what I can do is execute that, and I get a 201, a 200 success. Let's try it again. Let's remove something, the output, and then execute. I should get a 400 bad request. Output is a required property. So input payload validation failed. So we need that that model. We get that that input validation failed because the API is expecting a product. And I essentially just grab the information I need out of it and then insert, this is the Mongo here, into the database products collection, insert the dictionary of. Okay, and then essentially the last thing that I'll go over on this route for now is grabbing one of these products. Let's call it the product item. We make this, again, we have to pass resource, which is a Flask RESTPlus or is that, yes, from Flask RESTPlus import resource. So this tells us I'm going to string the ID. The ID is the object ID, a string of the object ID, which in the database goes in here, very unique, hard to create an additional one of these or even guess at it. Pretty difficult thing to do. And when I get the string version of that, I can do on the database find just one of the products that has that object ID, push it through the product schema again, that is defined via marshmallow, and then return that result. Okay, so we can even do this in IPython. So let's do this. We don't have an ID. So actually from bson, we need to import object ID. It's a bson object. And then what I could do is see, for example, I have this object ID, and what we have here is product equals db.products, find one, that ID, object ID, and then put that in there. Close it up, and then I have that back. And then the result will look like this result. Product schema again is not defined, so I need to bring that in and instantiate it. Oh, so I actually instantiated product schema. This is just one. Again, we get that marshmallow complaining, but then I could see the result here is the marshaled result. Result.data is this one product. Okay, so this is essentially the layout. I realize I went through this pretty quickly, but I did go through that blog post that I mentioned that I'll post at the beginning of this video. I really laid out this project very similar to that blog post, which is a fantastic one. And so if you want to catch up on it, but what we have now at the end here is this API for products that we can start manipulating and using to create an information product, Casper. Thanks for listening, everybody. Like and subscribe. It really helps me out. I am definitely going to be following this project through to the end, to creating something, launching it. And so stick around and we will keep working on it. Have a great, happy New Year 2019. Talk to you later.